Hello, friends. Eddie Ryder here. Welcome to Designers Lane podcast. I have a fabulous guest today, Nancy. Yay, so excited to have Nancy. She is a past guest. We're going to jump over and talk to her real quick, get a whole bunch of ideas and thoughts of building her home. But before we do that, I want to remind you to subscribe. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow so you get updates and you're notified every time we have a new podcast. Let's jump. I am super excited. First of all, I have a special guest, a client and customer. We're going to jump over Nancy, and then let's get some basic business out of the way to start with and let everybody know that we have our cheat sheet to my left and your right. So as I look over and you look over, that's going to help me reminder. And like I said earlier, I have the font blown up so we can see it and I can see it. So that's wonderful. I want to start with our very first question. Where did you and your husband move from?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. And we're going to let our listeners, because again, we have viewers and then we also have listeners. So this is where we encourage people also to go to YouTube. They can look and see also. But Austin, Texas, and we're in central North Carolina. Now, what is the weather like? I always laugh at this because I've had a couple clients in Austin, Texas. Is it similar to Raleigh, Durham, Cary area?
No, not at all. We do have winters, but the summers are very, very hot, and the summers last a long time.
Long time. Is that similar to, I've talked to you, we've been working together for a couple of years now, and where I went to Dallas.
Yes.
Is it similar hot? Because, I go to, what is it, July, I do the lighting show in Dallas, and I think I text you and a couple of other people that it's 115 degrees in the shade at midnight. Is it similar?
It's very similar.
It is. That's nice. But I hear a lot of great things about Austin and about the Dallas area. Yeah. So that's beautiful and nice. What was the primary reason that made you guys move over? And because I'm assuming you sold your house in Texas and this is your primary house that you live in now in Cary?
Correct.
Awesome. And what was sort of the main reason that you guys moved to the area?
So our daughter and son-in-law moved from the D.C. area to Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And we had been up visiting quite a few times, and then we started to have the grands. And we were coming up almost every 6 weeks, and they started driving us around, enticing us a little bit.
Right.
And one of the, areas is the neighborhood that we currently live in,
right.
which we really, really enjoyed and liked the feel of it. And so with a lot of thought, we made the decision to move up here.
Well, 6 weeks is frequently. In my book,
6
that's
weeks
there.
Is frequently.
That's not very often or a long amount of time to be able to come. It is often in my book, frequently to be able to come. Now, as you know, and I'm not that familiar with building in Texas, it's more in central North Carolina, that we are in an area in the central part of North Carolina where we're tearing down properties and projects, which is actually your house that we did. Is that something similar that's happening in Austin?
You see it a little bit, but not as much.
Not as much.
It was kind of a culture shock for me when we came up here to hear that concept.
Right.
And once I got to learn why,
right.
The process became a little bit, easier for me to comprehend it.
Right.
But there was a lot of differences that you and I discovered early on, like stone versus brick,
right.
Things like that,
right.
Because we have quarries on every corner, it seems like, in Texas. And so things like that were different for me to hear.
It is. And talking about the stone, we'll sort of follow up a little bit with that, is I always pitch everyone that there's natural stone, and then, which is what we used on your project, and we're going to have pictures in a few minutes that we're able to look at it. And then there's synthetic stone, man-made stone. I'm definitely a fan of natural stone. And through the process of building and designing, I try and educate all of the clients. Obviously the builders and I know the difference, but some of the synthetic stone looks really, really good. But there's a chance and an opportunity down the road where you cut it. If the colors are going to come off, it looks good, but it is not natural stone. Did you have an idea already with the natural stone and versus the synthetic?
I did, but I thought I did. And I think what you just said is important, that you try and educate.
Right.
Because what was common practice in Texas, or when we built previously, did not translate here.
Right.
Which was good that you were able to tell me, you know, this is why we probably need to do a combo of both.
Right.
So I think that there were just different cultural aspects of building here versus
Versus Texas.
Texas.
It is, and that's very
That was
true. And I think that you want things differently if you were to build a house in the mountains or you were to, do something
yes,
at the beach. You'd want it to be a little bit of a different flavor and a little bit of a different feel. And mixing natural stone and brick, which we used brick in your application. And I think it was about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we actually had one of the brick vendors from the same store that we bought it, which I believe is Custom Brick,
hmm
on Capitol Boulevard, again in Central North Carolina. And we talked about a couple of things, and we have this on our notes. One is I remember at the very, very end that we got a call that the brick that we chose, gosh, what, 6, 7, 8 months ahead of time,
right,
was no longer available, or it was back ordered for 50 years and we weren't going to be able to use it anymore. And it was a very quick, like, oh my gosh, Nancy on the phone texting, what are you doing in 30 minutes? Is there
right,
any way that you can meet me? Because the brick mason needs to start really, really soon. And we need to change the brick and physically look at it. And that matters. And fortunately, with the brick, I think it's beautiful. It ties in incredibly nicely with the stone. But want to let all of the listeners and the viewers know that just because we pick it out in the very beginning doesn't mean it's what it's going to be in the end.
that's right.
Was that a I'm looking up there for the answers, and there's
hmm
no answers up there. That was a big change or challenge for you, I'm assuming, or is that something? Because you said you've done a couple of homes before. Is that expected, or is that like, holy crap?
It
Thank goodness I'm not in China somewhere.
it kind of was that latter feeling of what are we going to do, and
Right,
we did have to make a decision really quick,
right,
but I think once we had the knowledge that, hey, this is not going to come to fruition, they're not going to be making it, we really had no choice except to go out and pick something else out. That made the process a little bit easier
right.
because it is what it is at that point. Um, but I think, all in all, if you have to be flexible
You have to be
in
flexible.
those kind of situations because sitting there and whining for your brick that you're never going to get. I mean, I think they gave us a timeline which was 8 months out, and
Yes,
that would have
which is unheard of.
it's unheard of,
Right.
and it would have stalled the entire
Right.
process.
Well, and I think in the beginning when you're building, everyone's like, well, we can take time, we can take time. And then you get 4 or 5 months into it and you're like, I don't want to wait another 6 or 8 months. It's long enough to be able
hmm
to do the home. And I don't remember exactly, but I felt like we made that decision in like a week.
We
I
did.
mean, it was literally Monday or Tuesday. I called you and I rescheduled my appointments and said, oh my gosh, I hope you're in town. This is what we need to do. It won't take long to physically go,
Right.
but we looked at it. And I believe that sometimes having fewer choices actually helps with the decisions than having a lot of choices or
Exactly.
multiple choices. And
Exactly.
that's what we had. It was very much when we went there, we met with, I think it was with Nancy, one of the other
hmm
regionals that was there because it was very quick.
It was quick.
It was like, what can we get our hands on in the next, what, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks at the absolute
And
most?
I think that's also the point that you and I got to with educating ourselves with the market
Right.
because it was after COVID and there were a lot of things that shops weren't opening up, things weren't happening the way
Things
they
weren't
did.
happening and they were changing quite frequently.
And things that used to be in stock were no longer in stock. And so, for you and I to be able to say, okay, what is available? That really narrowed our choices down
It is.
too.
And what still looks good. I
And
mean, I want it to look
exactly.
beautiful and nice for you, but there still has to be a reasonable time. I mean, it still took time to build your home, but you don't want it to take forever. It's not like it was a
No.
100,000 square foot home. There's a reasonable amount of time. And you're right, with the delays that we had because of COVID and because of whatever restrictions we had, I think the brick was one. And I also think the windows were another one that they
Yes.
ran a little bit longer. And there was one window that just finally came in because it was delayed. And it matters. But I also encourage people, don't change something that you don't like over a month or two. But there's certainly enough product out there to be able to make a decision and a selection that looks good. And that kind of actually makes me think of something else that I always encourage customers and did the same thing with you. And you probably thought I was nuts doing this. I was like, let's work on the selections as much as we can in the very beginning, right
Absolutely.
when we break ground or even before we break ground, because I started getting notes and text messages and emails from the distributors and the vendors that, hey, the brick typically takes 3 weeks to get in. It may take 3 or 4 months to get in. The same thing with the windows, the same thing with the shingles. And I was like, Nancy, let's go ahead and jump on it. I know that we've not even broke ground yet, but it could take a little bit longer. And what I've learned from there is even though they may say it's going to take 2 months to get in, it may take 6 months to get in. It
Exactly.
may change. And you don't know that sometimes until the last moment. And you have to deal with it. That's absolutely part of it. I mean, you have to deal with it, and it is a big deal. One of the other things, which I don't want to forget, there's so many on there, is that we did a sample wall for you.
Yes.
Sample wall meaning that it's about 30 inches, 36 inches tall and wide, and it had the brick. It had the because we did a thicker mortar joint. I always want to call it grout, but it's mortar
Hmm.
for brick. And then we chose the color, and I believe the brick mason Victor, who is incredible, did a couple for us, and then we could physically see how it was going to be. I call it rubbing your thumb in, or was it going to be smooth? Was it going to be a standard brick joint or
Hmm.
mortar joint? Is it going to be a little bit taller? And we went with the taller because it was an older flavor or an older look. I always remember that someone backed into it. Thank goodness. After it was done, no one will admit who backed
Of
into it,
course.
but it was down. And fortunately, we made the selections.
Yeah.
But I thought that was incredibly helpful to be able to physically see it. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. Because as you well know, my husband, he has to, he's not a conceptualist.
Right,
And so for him to be able to kind of see it, feel it, visualize
right,
exactly what it looks like,
right.
especially mixing the two components, that was incredibly helpful.
It's helpful for everyone. I can see things with my eyes closed and turned around. Most people can't, and that actually can lead us into our next conversation. Is these whole 3D drawings we have right now and the renderings? We used someone to do Haley to do the outside landscaping rendering so we could see it in the
Right.
brick and stone, and then the same thing with the inside with the layout of the furniture. Do you guys find that that's helpful for you? I know it's helpful for Bob,
It
but
is. It's incredibly helpful for him. Um, and with 3Ds, as we well know,
right,
they're a little skewed.
right,
So you still have to use your imagination a little bit,
right.
but it does help to say, okay, this is what, conceptually,
Mm-hmm.
this is going to look like.
Well, and I think there's a huge difference from traditional plans that I've been doing forever, where you look, they call it plan view or bird's eye view, which we're looking down. I always tell people, imagine your back's on the ceiling and you're looking down. That's what it is.
Right.
And most people have a hard time. They're like, what is this? What am I looking at? And you're very, very right. Even with the 3Ds, it's on still an angle.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly 100%. And what the goal is to not order something that you don't love, that doesn't work, and you're not happy with. Sometimes it happens. I know we're recently talking about flipping a little bit of furniture
Hmm.
around. But the big thing for me is if a sofa that's 7 feet wide, you want to make sure it's 7 feet wide and not 9 feet wide. Some of the
Exactly.
new sofas are wider and they're not going to be able to fit. Some people don't think about that and they don't look at that. They're more about the fabrics, or more about, is it comfortable? It's not whether or not it's the right size, or the lamp table. Is
Right.
it too small? Is it too big? Is it too short? And then being able to see that sometimes I think is helpful for people. And it's very new. I mean, it's just come out. They had three. I mean, back in, gosh, I think it was the late 80s. I was in school. You hand rendered everything. And
Mm,
it took hours and hours and hours and hours, which meant it was expensive. And it's just you're hand rendering it.
right.
And if you're not flawless at it, it becomes a challenge. And now these new programs, I just on the weekends can sit around and drag and move stuff around, and it takes 30 minutes or an hour. And it's like, oh, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And you're able to physically do it. And you're right, it doesn't get it within 6 inches, but usually within that, it's okay. But I think 6 inches versus 2 feet
Oh,
is a
yeah.
big
That's a big
thing
deal.
for sure. Awesome. So I'm so excited about the brick joints that you did. I can't get over it. Hopefully in the pictures we can talk about it.
Sure.
It's probably a little hard to see that's in there, but going to that wider mortar joint on the brick, I think was absolutely huge, and then worked to the nth degree. So I want to look at my little cheat sheet right here and go through. We kind of jumped around a little bit because I got excited about the brick. So let's talk about surprises that happened during the project, which we did talk about a couple. Are
Sure.
there one or two that happened to you that was, and again, I always like to be positive and negative, that, hey, this is great, or either, this was unexpected. One, we know the brick, that just wasn't happened, that you think was an important role for you, one or two?
Sure. We got caught in the lumber shortage
Oh, golly, I forgot about
as
that.
well.
Right.
And again, these are things that you can't predict. This was dictated by the market and
And that
supply
lumber
and demand.
shortage had two things. It delayed, and if I remember correctly, I think it had a cost
Yes,
effect.
yes, it did.
But you know what? I think you have to have wood to build your
You have
house.
to have wood.
I mean, you don't have a choice.
And we didn't have a choice.
Right.
And so, yeah, that kind of caught us off guard.
Right.
I know I'm looking at the notes as well when we talked about the plans for
Right.
the architectural plans.
Right.
Unfortunately, our architect was out for a long time, if you'll recall, because
Yes.
I think that entire office, and we were working remotely with her. I
They
think
did. It
she
was remotely, and they did close down. And if I remember, we made multiple changes
Mhm.
that's in there, and the house also grew
It did grow.
in size.
Yeah.
And so and I'm sure that was a little bit unexpected as well.
Mhm.
Although now it's beautiful and it's nice, but those happen, and you have to be very aware
Mhm.
that happens. And I know we the other day talked about the conversation having is that, are you going to be extremely strict and say my house has to be X amount of square feet? I don't want it to go up and down more than a couple hundred square feet, which sometimes is unrealistic. Or either, you know what, the house is what it is. I don't want it to be 10,000 square feet. But, if it's, 500 or 1,000 more square feet than what we thought it would be, so be it. I mean, it kind of is what it is.
Right. And we did. We enclosed two open porches,
We did upstairs and downstairs.
upstairs and downstairs. And so that obviously added some square footage but we really wanted it.
And it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that the downstairs sitting room that it was enclosed is looking really good. We're getting close to furnishing, but sort of reflecting on that, we had to move the grill and the cooking area because that was originally designed to be in there. And we want to make sure that listeners and viewers understand that when you enclose and you tweak things a little bit, that has to be moved because you want a grill. I mean, you physically want a grill. And we eliminated a fireplace outside that wasn't very important to you,
Right.
Having a grilling area and having the sitting area. And I also think it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but we added screens to that
Right.
outside porch.
Right.
And that has to be planned, I believe, in the beginning or on the front side of it. So I like when they hide, when they come down, and they certainly did. They don't have to if you add them on, later, but they look beautiful when they go in.
Right.
That's there. And then I think the something else that we did that we played is the exterior paint colors. It was just we looked and we had to think about them, and we looked at them with the knockdown brick wall, the sample wall, and it's in there, but that plays a little bit. And I always tell people it's close to when it goes up. Never everything's not 100% exact. And we built a custom home. I mean, that's in there, and I think there is a huge difference between a full-on custom home and a partially custom home and a spec. There's nothing wrong with any of them. They're all fabulous.
Right.
But when you do full-on custom, we spent a lot of time together and a lot of communication. I mean, there were months and months and months. I still feel like we talk every day, sometimes, if not 2 or 3 times a day. It may be quick,
Right.
but it's just, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or this is going to be delayed. The screens are going to be delayed, or the brick's going to be delayed. What do you think about it? And that's not even talking about furniture.
No.
I mean, that's
No.
just construction
Yeah.
that's in there. And I also believe that we ended up tweaking a couple of windows upstairs
Right.
because of the sizes and the delays and not having a window in a particular room. And it's that, hey, do we want to be able to have it? And I know that you want to forget, and then your husband certainly wants to forget, that there were a couple doors that just disappeared. And I think they disappeared outside. And then now that also brings back a flashback. We changed the front door.
Yeah.
We went from, was it 8 feet to 10 feet?
10 or 12.
10 or it
Yeah,
was
it was
big.
significant.
It was
Yeah,
significant
it
that
was
was in there.
significant.
Beautiful and nice, and we laughed about it.
We did
But
afterward.
it's big.
It's
So
big,
that's in
but
there.
it was needed for it to look proportionately
Right.
correct.
Right.
We looked at the other ones and we said they're just going to
Just
be
not
too
happy with
small.
it. It
Yeah.
is. And it's something you want to be happy with. You
Mhm.
see it. It's a big part. It's the part of the eyes of your home. It's what you'd be able to see. I think that's a really big deal. Quick question I just thought of. Uh, Half my clients, when I work down at the coast, are actually from out of state.
Mhm.
Do you feel you would have been comfortable being out of town and out of state with this project? Because I know that we met a lot together on site. We still communicated and sent you
Right.
pictures,
Right.
but do you think you could have done this without being here, or is being here as frequently as you were?
Uh, for me, no.
Okay,
I really needed to be close to the project.
right,
And I know my husband did.
right,
I think it would have made it more difficult. And just being able to bounce things off of either you or the builder
right.
made an incredible difference.
I think having the idea to bounce stuff off and having someone say "I love it," yes, or either "Oh my gosh," I don't. Hopefully, I never said I hated it, but it's like I'm not sure I would quite do that. That's in there, so it happens, and that's nice. And some people are comfortable only coming once a quarter. Other people really want to be there. I'm good with either or. It's
Right.
fun to communicate, and again, I try and like to educate people.
Right.
Let you know, hey, this is why I suggest this, instead of saying this is why you need to do this, and there's no answer, to it. Just make it happen. It's nice to physically be able to know if that works.
But I think that the design work, especially up front, was so incredibly helpful.
Right.
And I know I could never have done that by myself
Right.
with going through tile selections, floor selections, all those things that go into the quote design of it that really make that, lend the personal touch.
There was a fair amount. Again, if I remember, we used Florida tile for the tile. They were incredible. Paulo was fabulous there. I know that you and I went at least twice
Yes.
together. And I went twice without you just to double check. And then I think that there were still kind of your mud area. We had to flip and change that a little
Yep.
bit.
Yep.
So again, part of the deal. And it's been discontinued and dropped. And it's beautiful what's there. And we have a picture of it. Is absolutely gorgeous. To me, it's more of, we wanted the look. The pattern was really, really important. That's in there. That was a really big deal. And again, just kind of left that out. We talked about the windows and about the wood. The tile played a major important role that's in there. That leads up to, and I already know your answer on this, is having a designer and having help and having someone to push back the relevancy or the importance that you feel that you needed it, or either you didn't necessarily need it.
I think there's a big difference that a lot of people sometimes don't understand the difference between a designer and a decorator.
Right.
And having the design aspect is so crucial to how everything is going to eventually be decorated.
Right.
So,
Eventually.
Eventually. Yeah. Everybody wants to get to the pretty stuff.
Right. And it's not always about the pretty stuff.
It's not. Yeah, exactly. And so
the fluff, let's call it the fluff. Right.
yeah, so that design work is, and like you said, opinions. You've got a great eye for color.
Right.
I can sometimes think of something, but then you're able to say, but this with this, so how it would lead in from one room to the next, how it would flow,
Yes.
things like that.
Which is important.
Flooring, from paint,
Right.
all of that. So that's why, I think it's so important.
It was incredibly helpful for me to have inspiration pictures and a general idea of the direction that you were going to go. And then we were able to look at other photographs and other pictures and then give you other colors and say, hey, Nancy, I think this is going to look great. This is a great idea. Or either, hey, I'm not so sure this is the best.
Right.
And then we had a general idea decorating wise, on the interior furniture. And we want to separate the two. There's the decorating and then there's the construction. And we had, because of the delays, we had to allow 6 to 12 months for some of the furniture to come in,
Right.
which is a little challenging for people because they want to be able to see things. But if it's like, hey, I want the bulk of my furniture in within 30 days when I move into the house, I don't want to sit on the floor.
Right.
Then you have to sort of make some decision that's in there. And I know that I laughed that we replaced that lovely upstairs rug in bedroom number 3,
Right.
the green rug.
Right.
And some of that is that, hey, we're not going to do it. I always have a little hidden agenda. Well, I'm just going to show them a rug eventually that works in there. And it's also finding a rug that's reasonable.
Right.
That's a reasonable cost, that's not crazy expensive, and it's not going to take forever to get in. Where it's like, okay, and this actually leads us now into another number or another fact. It's allowances and budgets. We have allowances for building your home, and then we have allowances for decorating and furnishings. Decorating and furnishings has a number, and we try really hard. I think we've done pretty good.
We have.
Staying within that number. Building the house, not so sure. That may vary a little bit, but it is what it is. I mean, the cost of wood, the cost of the brick, it just went up because material cost, and I think freight had a tremendous amount to do with it.
It did.
The added to it, and you have to make the physically decision to be able to do that.
Right.
So I'm happy to hear that you feel having a designer there, and then something that you're probably not overly familiar about is we have a decorator, we have a designer. Well, now there's an e-designer that's coming out there. So there's someone else in the industry. And I'm curious to see, because sometimes the e-designers are great, but they're online. They're not in person. The feedback that they give is very digital. It's drawn out. I use some of them to help with drawings because they're cost effective, and I can help pick out brick and stone and windows and do other what I consider a little bit more important things. It's all important, but things that are a little bit quicker on the timeline while someone else is physically doing the renderings or doing the drawings. But your husband needed, hey, we need stuff. We want to talk to you. We want to see you. We want to let you hold it, when it's that time, versus not everything can be pictures and digital. We physically need that. I'm old school. I've been around for a long time, been in the industry for a while. I like communicating and talking with the people. And the reason I like to do that is I can tell if you're upset by the conversation on the phone. I'm not a big fan of emails because it's hard to read. Sometimes you read those emails and it's like, oh my gosh, they just want to rip my head off. And then when you talk and like, they're not upset after all. Right. So where if you talk to someone, it's like, hey, I can tell if you're about to freak out, and vice versa. You can, I think, tell if I'm about to freak out. And what's been great with me and actually with other designers, it's not just me, is that we do care about the project. We want you guys to be happy. We want your family to be happy, but we want it to look beautiful and nice.
Sure.
So ultimately, you pay the bill and your choice, but it is my job, it is the designer's job to give you at least an avenue of what works best, and then make the decision and then go on from there. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And I think the other thing that you have to realize too is, I know when we came, because we had done a home before,
right,
we thought, well, a lot of this can be used again. But this was a totally different style house.
right.
And while we were able to use some things, a lot of them had to go.
Do you agree that decision has to be made once you move in? Because I feel like we're doing that as we speak. That's in there, and I don't put my foot down and say I know that you're going to replace it. But my thought is, you know what? Let's let things happen and then go where they go. Or is it better for you to say, you said that we were going to have to replace 80% of our furniture,
Right.
not 50%.
Right.
I'm probably going to be right. That's in there.
Right.
But it's like I care, but it's not as important to get like your bedroom done, area for the grandkids done. It's not as important to build the house.
Right.
That's on there.
Right.
And quite frankly, if it means having stone or having sofas, I'd rather you have stone.
Right.
Because you can get the sofas a little bit later.
Exactly.
And I know other people may disagree with me with that. And it always happens that my little budget or my big budget for whatever it is for decorating and furniture, that kind of gets robbed.
Sure.
And put in construction. But again, you can't replace the countertops. You can't replace the stone. Not easily. You can,
No.
but I think it's super expensive.
And your appliances.
Appliances are huge. And again, that falls back into our allowances, having a
Exactly.
realistic number and an idea. I don't think people realize that chef appliances, nice appliances. I think we used Thermador, great, a friend of mine, love them, their product. It has a price tag with it.
Yes.
And it's a real number, and it's different today than it was 10 years ago, if not 5 years ago. And it's certainly different than 20 years ago.
Sure.
And I can't tell you the times that I've worked with the builder or builders and then give allowances, and then people come back and say, oh my gosh, does the refrigerator really cost $15,000? And I was like, well, it could cost 25 or 30 if that's what you want. It's what's there, and it's what's realistic. And not to be morbid, we do have to say, you know what? This is my last primary house.
Right.
And it is what it is. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be nice, and make that decision. But you're not going to replace your refrigerator.
No.
I mean, and it's just, and I think I made the joke that sometimes it's a little cheap car that goes in there.
Right.
But they are what they are. They're expensive.
And that's it. You're exactly right. And those are the decisions. Plus, those are the big, hard decisions up front are usually the pricier decisions.
Right.
And I think that's why it's so important to have a realistic budget and where you're going to go with that.
Very realistic budget. And we have to also remember that the appliances play into, I love Fulford. I use them a ton for the cabinets. Those appliance dimensions and specifications need to get to the builder. And so
Exactly.
we can't change our mind and say, well, we're going to go from a 48-inch refrigerator to a 42-inch refrigerator, or we're going to go from a 40-inch refrigerator to a 60-inch refrigerator.
Exactly.
That has a major effect on the way that Fulford or your cabinet people are going to lay out the cabinets.
Exactly.
Same thing with the range. I'm a big fan of 48. I like the 60,
Right.
but sometimes some people are like, I'm not going to spend $18,000 on a range, and 60 inches is huge. I'm only going to use 2. So there's that happy medium that's in between, and I believe that we did 48 for you.
We did.
Beautiful. And it works very, very nice. That's in there. But if you were to change to a 36 or a 60, that would have affected the cabinet guys like there was no tomorrow, and the hood.
And it would have affected everything.
Everything.
Because then, it would affect how much space I had on either side.
Right.
While the island is, very spacious.
Right.
We had to be cognizant of either side of that stove area so that I would have cooking space.
I was just reading. Yes, the island was a big deal, and you could probably dance on the island with 2 people. I love it. I just read something the other day about the depth, say from your range or your the front of the cabinets where your range is to your island, is that minimum is 42 inches, and we actually did 55, close to 60 for you.
Mm-hmm.
And do you like that? There's always not always. There's a debate sometimes whether or not 36, which is minimum, which I think is incredibly tight.
Small.
That's 88. 42, I still think is a little bit tight and small. I sort of like 48, somewhere up to close to 60. That way, if the dishwasher goes down or if the range doors, the ovens go down, you still have the ability to walk around it. Or if you lower it, you can stand in front of it, and without
Right.
sitting on the countertop.
Right. I love the extra area
Right.
between. I think it makes it feel more spacious. I know, at least in my family, and why that area was so important to me was because everybody gathers
In the kitchen.
in the kitchen.
Yes.
And with our previous house, we found that space got really crowded really quick.
Right.
And so you and I talked a lot about, can we move the island back a little bit?
Didn't we go from 2 islands down to 1, 2 smaller ones? I
Yeah,
think in the
we-
way back in the original plans
Mhm.
that it would be a little bit better for your application to have 1 larger island. And
Correct.
it's large that's in there, but it's still beautiful and it looks amazing. And we pulled that back and we marked it on the floor. I mean, we physically sat there and looked at it on the floor. It seems a little larger than it is, but it's amazing now. I mean,
Right.
it's really perfect. That's there.
And I think that's important too when you're talking either long distance or in person.
Right.
There were a lot of times that we went out and taped things off. Had to do it with the kitchen table.
Literally taped them. The blue
Taped.
tape. Right.
I had an idea of what we wanted, and I know I kind of said, try and find it.
Right. Well, it was, and that is an example is that there are a gazillion rectangle tables that have corners,
Right.
that have a traditional, I think it's 90-degree corner
Mhm.
that's in there. And it was really important for you guys to have an oval table. The space was too big to have round. I'm a big fan. If you have a round table, then the room needs to be relatively square or close to even. This was very rectangular.
Very.
And I happened to be going to one of the markets, I actually think it was out in Dallas, and because it was hot again, where we found the round table. And that was one of the things that it's like, the sofa needs to be this. I care, but I don't care about the sofa. The chairs are nice. Don't care about the chairs, but it is a level 10. It is a must that we have an oval table because we don't want the kids, the grandkids smashing into
Right.
it, and I hate to say it, as you get older, they cause bruises.
Yeah.
I mean, when you bump into the corner, they don't go away overnight anymore.
Exactly.
And it's nice to be able to have it, but we certainly lucked out with that. But it was something that you gave me at the very beginning and said, okay, this is really important to me. I want an oval table. I do not want a square corner table or a rectangle table.
And we had to work on that earlier than later because, again, of the availability
Yes.
of a lot of these products.
Availability took time, and there was about 3 in the world.
Exactly.
So, and then I think one of them was the right color, and it worked out very, very nice that we're able to do that.
Right.
And it caught a little bit of begging and a little bit of baking cookies and pies to get it in a timely matter. I think that there were 3 or 4, and the next order was going to come in 6 or 8 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, we don't have 6 or 8 months. But there was a little bit of a learning curve. Yes, we did that in the beginning, but in retrospect, I probably would have done that at the very, very beginning,
Right.
which sounds nuts. It's
I
like,
know.
who would pick out their kitchen table the day that you break ground, and it takes a year or 14 or 16 months to build your home. But if it takes 12 months to get that table in or a little bit longer, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. We're going to jump over now and look at some of our pictures, and then we're going to ask you some questions.
There's the oval table.
There's the oval table that we were just talking about. And kind of what I like to do here is just ask you a couple questions and things we see, not overly drug out. And this is where they'll actually be online, so we don't get to see us. So that's on there. We can talk about it. This is a great example that we have the oval table for furnishing and decorating that we were talking about, that we didn't want to have the square corners, and we do have the leaf that's in there, and that was a big deal. And then we also didn't want the one thing people have to understand with the oval table is you have to have a pedestal in the center. They don't come with corner legs.
Right.
So you start getting that size where they become a little bit too large. And then if you end up having to have a double pedestal underneath, it gets to be a little bit formal. So this worked out well. And golly, I think this was from Parkview, if I remember correctly, or Park somebody that's on there, and it worked out well. And they actually had the chairs too. And then this was wonderful. The porcelain stuff that's in the sideboard or the break front was yours existing. So we're able to mix some things that's in there. And, we're slowly progressing little by little. We have a beautiful alabaster lamp and some art. We're not finished. That's there. And of course, this is my little friend there on the left eating. If I remember correctly, he was licking the bowl saying, hey, I'm hungry, feed me. But this was nice. We're able to see it and this shows the oval that works out really, really well. That's in there. And I think it's beautiful and it's nice. Our next picture that we have is the kitchen. We could see this from the last one. What I wanted to show everyone and talk about is that one is the countertop, which was a big deal. We had to make a couple of changes and edits that's a little bit big deal, but it's a natural travertine that is silver travertine that's in the backsplash, and it's coated. It's old school, but it looks so beautiful. And what I want to point out is that it has a range to it. So you can pick 2 or 3 tile samples out, and they're not going to look the same. But fortunately, you were already aware of that.
Right.
And Florida Tile was great that they had multiples on there, and they gave us some samples. But I tried to do a really, really hard job and let everyone know that it's not going to look just like this one. It's going to vary. But I think it's amazing.
And what I love about it, I do love the variation about it. I know that's kind of scary for other people,
Sure.
if they just want white subway. But I thought the variation was what gave it the character.
It's classic. Now, you have a pot filler. That's over the range. Do you use it?
All the time.
You do use it all the time.
I do use it all the time. Sometimes I forget.
Okay, I was going to ask
that
you,
it's
have you
there.
ever forgotten to put something underneath it and turned it on?
No, I haven't done that, but I
Okay.
have forgotten to, I'll go to the sink and then I'll go, what am I doing? I've got this right here. It's so incredibly easy to, especially with big pots when
Like stock pots and pasta
stock pots and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I use it all the time.
That works tremendously. And then above it, we actually found some pottery at a local pottery store. God, I can't remember the name of it, but we met quickly. Again, that was
Seagrove.
Seagrove. There you go. It was one of those things. Hey, what you doing? Do you want to meet me at the pottery store? Let's go look for some pottery. And it's nice. And then, we've connected all the hood. Beautiful. Fulford did an amazing job that's on there. And I always sort of preach that if you have a rangy or textured backsplash, it's always a little bit better with the countertops to be simpler in my mind. It's just, you don't want busy on both.
Right.
It's sort of either or. And this originally came from Francini, and then we met and looked, and we had to tweak it and make some changes. But what's nice with this is you have the bump outs on the slide out drawers to the left and right. And again, big shout out to our friends from Thermador.
Yes.
And then this is a 48-inch range.
Yes.
Do you use both ovens? Because I believe there's a 30 and there's an 18.
Yeah, I do actually. I don't use the 18 as much, but it's super nice to have for reheating or
Right.
small dishes.
Right.
But the right side, tends to work for us 90% of the time.
Love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And then also what we want to point out is we ran to the cabinets to the ceilings. So these are full height ceilings. And it's hard for people to tell, but we have 11-foot ceilings and not 10-foot ceilings.
Correct.
So they're a little bit taller. It's hard to tell in the pictures.
It is hard to tell.
I'm a big fan of a little bit taller when you can do them. I
Right.
think it's nice, but it looks amazing, beautiful that's in there. Our next slide picture that we have, again, it's the kitchen. So we have our little fun chickens and everything to the right. This actually shows that the texture of the countertop, how it had, and how we have a little bit of a bump out to the left and right of the range. And again, that pot filler, amazing. And then getting some lights up underneath the cabinet. And this falls back where we talked about how important it is to get the appliances, all the specifications to the cabinet maker, not only the range, but that insert for the hood. Big deal. Big deal.
Big deal. And you can see really from this perspective that if you had gone to a 60-inch, how much counter space I would have lost.
Yeah, I wouldn't have encouraged the 60 in this space. And you like to cook. That's really important to you. But it was like 48 works just fine and handles the needs in there. The other thing that we did is put the electrical outlets up underneath the cabinets. So it keeps a very clean backsplash. And you're neat and highly organized. So does that still work for you
I
if you
love
ran
it.
into an
Yeah,
issue?
and just when you plug them in, it's so easy. And they're out of the way, like you said,
Right.
and you don't get the dings and all of that on the walls.
It's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. So our next picture is, these are a lot of fun. There's a couple things. One, it's a barn door, so it slides back and forth. And I believe this was oak, and we stained it. So we got it from our friends, I believe, at ITC. They came through, so we're able to pick it and stain it. It has a texture glass to it. But I love these photographs. You actually found these at the farmer's market outside Raleigh. And we picked them up and went and looked at them, and they're great. They look absolutely fantastic. I love them 1,000%. The other thing that we added is that door handle,
Right.
which was a big deal. We want to remind people is that you have to have a door handle on these barn doors.
Yes.
And I know that some people feel like the barn doors are a little bit trendy. This is very appropriate for your style. And I love the fact that we stained it and it wasn't painted to match all of your other interior doors is I think amazing.
Yeah, and to me, I'm like you. It's the perfect accompaniment to go into a pantry versus just having a regular door. And
I love
you can
it.
close it off easily, but you can still get the light through it.
Very, very nice. And you have a beautiful pantry, which was really cool. So that works out well. Our next photograph is this is showing the bottom part of the barn door, the sliding door, and then this actually shows the floor tile that we had to change. And this is laid in a herringbone pattern, which I think is a huge ordeal. And again, a huge shout out. We just had this rug that came in from Ruggables. We love it. And it's something that can be cleaned. It works. It's washable. But when we talked a little earlier how we had to change and tweak the floor tile a little bit from floor to tile, this is one.
Right.
I think it looks beautiful and amazing. And we carried it into the pantry, and then you're not able to see there's a laundry room on the other side. Something I do want to remind everyone is that if you do a porcelain tile, it's typically a 1/4 inch thick. If you do solid pavers, it's thicker. It can be a 1/2 inch thick, and you have to know that in construction that's in there. And then this was very fortunate for us that it looks, I think, amazing. It looks absolutely fabulous. I love it 1,000%. Our next slide This is Willie. So this is your little friend who I love to death. So let everyone know. And he's a mixture of Dotson and Chihuahua.
Right.
Am I correct with
Right.
that? He's sweet. I love him. He loves me. He talks to me every time that I come over. But I had to take a little cute picture of him that's in there. So he's sweet as can be. Our next picture is what I wanted to show here. This is the area that we're still working on, is that, and part of the design, the stone stopped short. We ran the stone all the way to the ceiling. And this is the same stone that's on the exterior of the home.
Mhm.
We didn't mix it up. We were consistent. And as we look at a picture on the outside, you were able to see it. And of course, you had the existing table, and we're working with the lamps and the picture frames and the artwork. But I wanted to show here how the beams tied into the stone and how that natural stone was important. And it's tough to tell, but it's kind of cut off. There's a beam on the left side of that mirror that creates a balance. We're not able to see it right now, but I think it's amazing. And this is also a great picture of your hardwood floors.
Yes.
They're oak that's in there, and it's everywhere. But I think stunning and beautiful, 1,000%. Our next picture is your staircase. A couple things on here I wanted to bring up. We decided at the very end to add a runner.
Right.
So everyone went and fall down.
Right.
Slide down the staircase. It is beautiful. And we actually got that from Terry's Floor Fashion.
Yes.
That they did the runner, and we templated it out. And then we're slowly getting that center table done with flowers. But kind of wanted to point out how that paneling is added on the interior curve of the staircase. And it gives it a little bit of wow and zing. And it's fun to look at the pictures because you can say, okay, well, I definitely need something on the table. It's very different
Right.
when you're a person than when you look at it. But I wanted our guests to be able to see, or our listeners to see how that works. And this was a custom staircase. I believe it was from Vision. And they made it. It is a spiral or half spiral that goes all the way up. And planning. This took a ton of planning that was in
Yes.
there. It's
Yes.
not as so much. I don't want to discount that the pickets are the pickets, but the pickets are easy. It's how is it going to lay out? How is it going to turn? We want to make sure that it's wide enough. And then after you moved in, we figured out real quick that we're going to have a runner,
Mhm.
because it's just people are sliding down Willie has a hard time getting up, and it's like supposed to fear in sock feet, but I think it's amazing. And then the table and everything came in. But again, we planned. We knew that size and that opening where that table goes, that was a big deal, the size that it needed to happen. And we also pre-planned that there's electrical underneath it if you ever need it.
Correct.
So we probably are not going to need it. But better safe than sorry. When you're building and the electrician comes, you don't want to come back a little bit later and say, golly, I wish I had something there.
Right.
And I think that I probably had an agenda there, thinking that maybe you would have a Christmas tree
Yes.
and you would have a way to plug it in.
Right.
So things just sometimes happen that I don't tell anyone about. So I don't think that it's necessarily going to plug in right now with the table, but when the Christmas tree hopefully goes in there, if it's a small pencil tree, we're going to need to be able to put power to it.
Right.
And look, so that was the reason. I think it's amazing. So our next slide is the exterior of the house. And this, I just wanted to point out how we mix the natural stone and the brick that's in there. And it's impossible to tell with the picture that we did the wider mortar joints, but they are. And we have this turret round that's on the front. And again, we tweaked it. There was originally going to be a gate. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
Up
Yeah.
in there. And it was like, hey, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? And I wish I'd have taken a little bit of a different picture to see that front door, because it is stunning that's in there. But that shows nicely, again, how we had the smaller natural stone and we mixed it with the brick, and it goes all the way up on the tower, and you have the brackets and all the pieces that go around it.
And with the wider mortar, we were able to still get the look, I think, from the original brick that
Right.
we had picked out, because we kind of wanted it to feel older.
Did want old school feeling,
yeah.
older for sure, and to have a little bit of a tumbled flavor and a nice
Exactly.
complement, which I think the lighter brick, we didn't want to paint it,
Mm-mm.
but we wanted a lighter brick, works well. And even in the photograph, it looks a little lighter than it is. I feel like in person, it's a little bit richer and a little bit darker, but amazing. And we bought those fun pots again, and I think you planted most of them. And then put them in there, and they look beautiful. Progress, things happen little by little.
That's right.
That's on there. And what I love, and I've not seen it at Not yet, I've got to wait till November, December, where it gets dark at 5 or 6 o'clock. So, and to see the lights, I'm
Lights,
not going to go there at 9 o'clock
outdoor
and
lighting.
look at it, but it's beautiful. And the one thing you probably don't know is that these dormers that are on the top, we're actually spray painted them black on the inside. So when you look at them, it looks there, but those dormers don't go to anything. They
No,
go to they're just there for looks, but it was a big deal. And some of those things happen on the fly. I mean, it's like, hey, I don't want to see inside the roof. It has to be painted
exactly.
black, or there has to be some type of film that goes on the back of it. And that's part of having a great contractor and a good design team that are able to play with that and then work on it. So anything else there that you see? I think it's beautiful. I love
Yeah,
it.
we played around a lot with the paint color.
We did. We
But
did.
again, we would look at it in different light. Maybe different times of the day because it always
Different
changes
locations on the house,
and different locations on the house.
the front and the back.
But I think it all tied together really well.
I agree 1,000%. So, Drago, is that our last slide? It
It
is.
is.
And you know what? It's 45 minutes that we've been talking. I told you it would go through relatively quickly, and we have more. Well, actually, we hit most of the
Yeah.
questions, but we're going to, I think, get most of them and probably need to wrap up. That's in there. So I know Willie's probably licking his bowl and
Right,
wants food
Lonnie.
that's in there. Thank you so incredibly much. Hey, before we wrap up and say goodbye, there is something I want to add, and it's probably my last question.
Hmm.
Is there one or two things that you can offer our listeners and viewers that were really important to you? Not necessarily that you would do differently or, something that you found that were just extremely important to you that would be helpful for them.
Yes. In our previous process and previous house, we did not have the team that we did here.
Right.
And I think that was the most important thing from you and the builder working together, even the realtor at the very, very beginning, having a cohesive team, I think was invaluable.
Very nice. Very nice. And what about a number two?
And number two would be I think that you've got to be flexible.
Flexible. I agree with you a thousand
It's
percent.
you cannot get hung up on certain things that to the things that we've already talked about, that if they're not going to happen, they're not going to happen. And yeah, it's really important, especially in a custom home build, that you're going to have to kind of go with the ebbs and flows and know that up front versus if you think that you want to have just something straightforward,
Right.
then maybe a different type builder is the way to go.
That'd be the perfect builder for you. I love it. Teamwork and flexibility are great, great things to take with you. So thanks again, Nancy. I love it.
Sure.
Welcome to North Carolina. Although you've been here for a while, you don't need to be welcomed. And we're so happy. I'm so happy that you left Austin and then you and your husband and love Willie that came to Central North Carolina, and you have a beautiful home, and I'm excited. And hopefully, we're going to get all the furniture wrapped up in the next 6 months,
That's
and it's going to
right.
finish and look beautiful. So
Well, I can't thank you enough.
absolutely. I appreciate you coming to this podcast. This is fun. Not as bad as you thought
No.
it would be, and not as crazy. So that sounds great. Now we're going to wrap up at the very end, and then I'm going to talk to you again real soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eddie.
Wasn't that an amazing podcast from my wonderful friend and guest, Nancy? How can you for not get that little dog, Willie? Love him so much. Before we wrap up and close, I want to give you these terrific 3 tips. One, let's think about allowances. Remember, make sure that they are realistic, that you have a general idea of what things are going to cost. Number 2, we're going to pick up from our conversation is have an idea of what the sizes of appliances are going to be. So when they go to the cabinet guy, he's going to have a good idea of what they need to be. And remember, when we plan for 36 or 48 inch or 60 inch range, we can't change that, because if you change that range, you've got to change all of your cabinets. Number 3, something I want to bring up is have a general or a really good idea of your furniture layout, what's going to go where, whether you need to have an oval table. Remember, we talked about the oval table and not banging your legs on the corner, or whether or not you have a square. That's going to help tremendously in the layout with the architect when you're designing your plans. All these elements and plus many more are so important in your project. Don't forget them and let everyone know. I want to thank you again for tuning in to Designer's Lane. It was great. Want to remind you to subscribe. Big deal. That way you get all the notifications. And we want to wrap this up and thank our sponsors. Jenny Blanton, who is going to help with all of your real estate needs in Central North Carolina, or actually most of North Carolina. If you've got any questions, be sure and reach out to her. And also, we can't forget about Dogwood and Company. They're going to, again, be focused primarily in Central North Carolina, help out with your new construction luxury needs or any larger scales remodel. Thanks again for tuning in, and we're going to talk to you real soon.